Welcome to Truth Report. Tonight, we expose the silent expansion of a global network, a web of surveillance that touches everything from international trade wars to the very devices in your home.
We're talking about the unseen forces shaping our lives, the relentless push for data, and the erosion of privacy driven by geopolitics, corporate ambition, and unchecked state power.
From the high-stakes maneuvering between global superpowers, where economic leverage is increasingly tied to intelligence, to the hidden mechanisms behind government detention, we'll connect the dots.
And we'll reveal how even the most innocuous consumer gadgets are part of a larger ecosystem of data collection, a system further entrenched by political figures who champion this surveillance state.
Prepare for an in-depth investigation into how power, profit, and pixels are merging, transforming our world into an increasingly monitored landscape. This is Truth Report. Our first story takes us to Southeast Asia, where nations find themselves caught in the geopolitical crosshairs of a brewing economic Cold War.
The South China Morning Post reports that Asean countries are struggling to remain relevant and nimble amidst an increasingly transactional United States, particularly under a potential Donald Trump administration.
While observers hail the bloc's large inflows of trade from global superpowers, the underlying message is clear: economic independence is under threat, and with it, potentially, national autonomy.
This isn't just about tariffs or trade balances, Alex. As SCMP highlighted from the China conference in Jakarta, the chairman of the Malaysian Investment Development Authority, Tengku Zafrul Aziz, emphasized the need for a united front. This unity isn't just for negotiation, it's a collective defense against pressures that extend far beyond simple economics.
Exactly, Maya. In an era where economic competition is fierce, the battleground isn't just markets, but information. Countries like the US and China aren't simply seeking trade advantages, they're engaged in a sophisticated form of economic espionage and strategic intelligence gathering. Every major trade deal, every supply chain, every new technology transfer becomes a potential vector for data acquisition.
And this pressure forces ASEAN nations to make difficult choices. Do they align with one superpower's technological standards, potentially adopting their surveillance infrastructure, or risk being shut out? The nimble approach mentioned by SCMP implicitly means being adaptable to a landscape where economic decisions are heavily influenced by the intelligence gathered on competitors and allies alike.
We've seen this pattern before. Huawei's 5G technology, for instance, became a proxy battleground for data security and intelligence access. For ASEAN members, choosing a technology provider or agreeing to certain data-sharing protocols could mean inadvertently integrating a foreign power's surveillance capabilities into their national infrastructure.
The beneficiaries here are the global superpowers, the US and China, who seek to expand their spheres of influence, not just economically, but in terms of data dominance and strategic oversight. They gain leverage over smaller nations by controlling critical technologies and access to global markets.
The losers are potentially the citizens of these ASEAN nations, whose data sovereignty could be compromised, and whose governments might be coerced into decisions that prioritize geopolitical alignment over the privacy rights of their populace. The pressure to conform or face economic isolation is a powerful motivator for states to make concessions that have deep surveillance implications.
This geopolitical squeeze isn't just about who sells what to whom, it's a cold war of data and economic surveillance. Every strategic investment, every bilateral agreement, carries a hidden layer of intelligence gathering, aiming to monitor, predict, and ultimately control economic and political outcomes.
It's a stark reminder that in today's interconnected world, economic policy and surveillance are inextricably linked, with nations constantly assessing threats and opportunities through the lens of information control. From the grand stage of international economics, we now turn to a fundamental pillar of individual liberty and a critical tool for accountability: the right of habeas corpus.
ProPublica, a beacon of investigative journalism, has unveiled its Habeas tracker, a crucial public resource documenting cases challenging unlawful detention. This isn't just legal reporting, it's a direct confrontation with the state's power to disappear individuals.
This tracker, though seemingly focused on legal procedure, is profoundly relevant to surveillance. Unlawful detentions often stem from government actions that bypass due process, frequently relying on secret intelligence, undisclosed surveillance operations, or even algorithmic predictions generated by opaque systems.
The very nature of habeas corpus, challenging the legality of detention, forces the state to reveal its hand. And in many of these cases, the justification for detention points back to surveillance programs, data collection, and intelligence assessments that may never face public scrutiny or cross-examination in open court.
Consider the implications. If a person can be detained based on evidence derived from mass surveillance, or from algorithms that flag individuals without transparency, then the habeas tracker becomes an essential window into the consequences of unchecked state power. It exposes how surveillance can lead directly to the deprivation of liberty.
Who benefits from such detentions? Clearly, the state, which gains the power to remove individuals deemed a threat, often without disclosing the full extent of its intelligence operations. The benefit lies in secrecy and the ability to operate beyond public accountability, under the guise of national security.
The individuals, of course, are the profound losers. They lose their freedom, their reputation, and often their ability to meaningfully challenge the secret evidence presented against them. This is the ultimate cost of a surveillance apparatus that operates outside transparent legal frameworks.
ProPublica's Habeas tracker benefits not just the detained, but society as a whole by injecting a much-needed dose of transparency. It forces us to confront the reality that unchecked surveillance, particularly when it fuels an intelligence-driven detention regime, poses a grave threat to the rule of law and civil liberties.
This project underscores the direct link between the proliferation of surveillance technologies and the erosion of fundamental rights. When information gathered in the shadows can lead to detention without clear cause, the very foundation of justice begins to crumble.
It highlights that the fight for privacy isn't abstract. It's about preventing the kind of arbitrary state power that leads to individuals being stripped of their freedom based on surveillance data they can't even see.
We shift gears now to another example of how political rhetoric and economic disputes can directly impact critical infrastructure, and by extension, the surveillance landscape.
The Guardian reports that Donald Trump, in his latest tirade, is threatening to block a new bridge connecting the US and Canada, the Gordie Howe Bridge. He's demanding the US be fully compensated and even made a bizarre, false claim about hockey.
This is more than just political bluster or a trade dispute. As Democrats prepare to force a House vote on Trump's tariffs on Canada, his threat against a major piece of international infrastructure has significant implications for border control and, crucially, surveillance.
A bridge isn't just about moving goods and people, it's a critical choke point, a highly surveilled zone where national security and economic interests converge. Trump's demand for full compensation could easily translate into demands for data sharing, access to Canadian border security technologies, or other concessions that expand US surveillance capabilities at the border.
Indeed. Think about the technology already deployed or planned for a modern international bridge: license plate readers, facial recognition cameras, freight scanners, biometric checkpoints. Blocking the bridge, or making its opening conditional, is a power play over physical territory that inherently impacts data flows and surveillance protocols.
The beneficiaries, in Trump's view, would be the United States, as he attempts to assert dominance and control over cross-border movements. He frames this as benefiting American interests, but it often comes at the expense of established international cooperation.
The immediate losers are the economies of both Canada and the US, facing delays and uncertainty for a vital trade route. But the deeper loss is for citizens on both sides who would face increased scrutiny, potentially more intrusive data collection, and greater inconvenience at a border that's already heavily monitored.
This incident underscores the broader trend of the securitization of borders. Economic infrastructure, under this mindset, is no longer just for commerce. It becomes a tool for control, a stage for demonstrating national power, and a ripe opportunity for expanding surveillance capabilities.
The blurring lines between national security, trade, and data collection are starkly evident here. A bridge, meant to connect, becomes a site of potential division and enhanced surveillance, all fueled by political maneuvering and a transactional view of international relations.
It's a clear example of how political threats, even seemingly absurd ones, can have very real consequences for the physical and digital infrastructure that underpins our cross-border movements and the data collected on us.
Now, let's turn our attention from the geopolitical to the intensely personal, into our homes and backyards.
Electrek reports a range of deals on Anker power stations and eufy robot mowers. At first glance, this seems like simple consumer tech news, but there's a critical layer of concern here that we must address.
Eufy, a brand under the Anker umbrella, has a troubling history regarding user privacy. Despite marketing claims of local storage and enhanced security for their home cameras, reports emerged that eufy devices were uploading unencrypted facial recognition data and video streams to cloud servers without user consent.
This is a significant breach of trust. When a company claims local storage for privacy but then sends your data to the cloud, it completely undermines the premise of security. These robot mowers, like many smart home devices, are designed to map your private spaces, your house, your yard, creating detailed digital blueprints of your personal environment.
The potential for this spatial data, combined with other sensors on the devices, to be collected, stored, and potentially accessed by third parties or even exploited by vulnerabilities, is immense. These deals are enticing consumers to integrate more surveillance-capable devices directly into their most intimate spaces.
Who benefits? Clearly, Anker and eufy benefit from selling these devices, expanding their market share, and potentially collecting invaluable user data for various purposes, including targeted advertising or developing future products. The convenience factor is a powerful lure.
Consumers, on the surface, benefit from the convenience and discounted prices. But what they often lose is transparency and control over their own data and privacy. They unknowingly trade a piece of their digital autonomy for a robot that mows their lawn.
This story highlights the insidious creep of surveillance into our daily lives, often disguised as convenience or smart home innovation. The trade-off between technological ease and personal privacy is rarely an equal one, with companies consistently prioritizing data collection.
It underscores how even seemingly innocuous gadgets, like a robot lawnmower, can become nodes in a larger surveillance network. The cumulative effect of these smart devices mapping our lives creates a detailed digital footprint that is ripe for exploitation.
We must remain vigilant about the hidden costs of convenience. These deals aren't just about saving money, they're about inviting potential data collectors directly into the heart of your personal sanctuary.
Our final story brings us directly to the heart of the surveillance industry's influence on American politics and policy.
The Intercept has revealed that Kate Conley, a Democratic House candidate in New York and a former Biden national security advisor, has worked for defense technology firms pushing AI border surveillance, in partnership with none other than Palantir.
This is a textbook example of the revolving door between government service, the private defense and surveillance industry, and political aspirations. Conley, having served at the highest levels of national security, now moves into a role advocating for technologies that directly benefit her former employers or their partners like Palantir.
Palantir is a name synonymous with mass data analytics and surveillance, notorious for its lucrative contracts with government agencies like DHS, ICE, and the military. They provide AI-powered platforms that aggregate vast amounts of data, often for predictive policing and intelligence operations at the border and beyond.
The fact that a political candidate, especially one vying for a seat in Congress and with a background in national security, is connected to firms pushing AI border surveillance, highlights the deep integration of private surveillance tech interests into the very fabric of government operations.
This isn't just about enhancing security, it's about monetizing data collection and embedding powerful, often opaque, algorithmic systems into our immigration and border enforcement policies. It raises serious questions about algorithmic bias, due process, and the potential for abuse of power.
Who benefits from this arrangement? Palantir and its partner firms clearly benefit from lucrative government contracts, expanding their influence and profits. Political candidates like Conley benefit from industry connections and the promise of cutting-edge solutions.
The major losers are citizens and migrants alike, whose privacy is eroded, who face the risk of being targeted by potentially biased algorithms, and whose tax dollars fund these opaque, often controversial, surveillance programs. It also undermines public trust in the political process.
This story exposes the military-industrial surveillance complex in full swing. It shows how corporations actively influence policy through lobbying, campaign contributions, and the placement of their allies in positions of power, ensuring their surveillance technologies become indispensable to government functions.
It's a powerful reminder that the fight against expansive, unchecked surveillance must also address the symbiotic relationship between private industry and government, where profit motives often drive the expansion of our surveillance state.
From geopolitical maneuvering in Southeast Asia, where economic advantage is tied to intelligence,
to the very real threat of arbitrary detention facilitated by secret surveillance, highlighted by ProPublica's critical Habeas tracker.
And the assertion of national control over critical infrastructure through threats and demands for data, as seen with the US-Canada bridge.
To the insidious creep of data collecting smart devices into our most private spaces, disguised as consumer deals from brands like eufy.
And finally, the blatant revolving door between government and the shadowy world of AI border surveillance contractors like Palantir.
A common, undeniable thread emerges, the relentless, pervasive expansion of surveillance across every facet of our lives.
Economic competition drives nations to gather more intelligence, not just on rivals, but on their own citizens and those passing through their borders.
Political power is increasingly asserted through control over physical infrastructure and digital data flows, transforming borders into heavily monitored zones.
Corporate interests capitalize on our desire for convenience and our fears, embedding data collection and monitoring capabilities into the very technologies we invite into our homes.
And when the state overreaches, using surveillance to justify detention without transparency, the fundamental fight for rights like habeas corpus becomes more urgent and vital than ever.
The truth is, we are living in an increasingly monitored world, where privacy is not just a luxury, but a battleground.
Understanding these connections, seeing how these seemingly disparate stories form a cohesive pattern of expanding oversight, is the first step toward reclaiming our privacy and holding power accountable.
Join us next time on Truth Report, as we continue to shine a light on the shadows.
Stay